Hi everyone. Oh, I can't seem to get my slideshow off. Sorry. Hi everyone. Sorry about that. Welcome so much to the Museums Association's Virtual Conference 2020 and Monday's last session of the day, The Wisdom of Elders. It's definitely last but very much not least. We've got a fascinating discussion planned today. I will hand over to our chair, Sharon Heal, in a few moments to get started. But first, I just wanted to invite everyone to use the chat function to say hi, to introduce yourselves and to respond to any of the issues raised today. You can also tweet using the hashtag Museums2020. If you have a question that you'd like the speakers to address, then please share this in the Q&A. Please keep questions short and to the point so we can get to as many as possible. Closed captioning from the stage text and audio description from Vocalize are both available for this and every conference session, and you can access these via the menu, but do send me a private chat message if you have any problems or questions. Immediately after this session, we will hear from Jean Cameron, our conference host, who will wrap things up. But first, I'm going to hand it to Sharon for today's discussion.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm Sharon Heal and I'm the Director of the Museums Association, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to the Wisdom of Elders. It's been a brilliant first day of Museums Association Conference 2020. There's been some highlights, I'm sure you've had some. We had a very warm welcome from Maggie Appleton, our president, and Jean Cameron, our host this morning. We had a brilliant and insightful conversation about Black Lives Matter and museums and anti-racism with Hilary Carty and Jeffrey Palmer and Errol Francis, and also sessions on unlocking what participation means and looks like, how we unleash our power, whether that's our feminist superpower or our advocacy and making the case power. And several times today, I've heard mention of the two speakers we are lucky enough to have with us this afternoon. This is a very timely session. The role of elders has meaning in many cultures, but too often I think we dismiss the wisdom that's accumulated through years of engagement and practice. And it's timely because on the eve of the US elections, I know many eyes are turning in that direction. So it's my very great pleasure to be in conversation today with two amazing women, Johnnetta Betsch and Elaine Heumann. When I prepped this session with Johnnetta and Elaine, I asked how they wanted to be introduced, and they both said, briefly, the shorter the better. In fact, Elaine said, if the audience wants to know who we are, they can look us up. And do that, please. I have to respect their wishes. When you get a chance, look them up and see the long list of incredible achievements to their names. So let me briefly introduce them. Elaine is a consultant, teacher, coach, lecturer and leader who has worked with many museums throughout the world. And Johnnetta is an anthropologist, educator, museum director and college president and leader. That is far too few words to describe their careers and achievements, but I've been warned and I'm not going to take up any more time. These women need to speak and we need to hear from them, and they are very keen to take questions and thoughts and share. The more the better. So get on chat, get in the Q&A and let's hear what you think too. But first, we're going to hear from Johnnetta. Over to you.
The warmest possible greetings to each of you, my sisters, my brothers, my siblings all. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why in the world I am greeting you in kinship terms. Well, it's a good question, especially since I am pretty sure I'm not related to any of you by descent or by marriage. But the reason is quite simply this. When I was being trained as an anthropologist, but more importantly, as I have learned from experience, I know that kinship is about more than biology. Kinship is also about shared values. It's about shared dreams, even about shared work and purpose. And I do make the assumption that all of you with whom I am connected virtually at this moment, that all of you, like my young sister Elaine, you are committed to efforts to improve these institutions. to make them places that tell not just some of our stories, but the stories of all of us. Now, it's really an honor and it's just a joy for me to be in a conversation with, to be even virtually connected with my younger sister, Sister Elaine. Now, let me explain. She is my younger sister. I expect the kind of deference that she usually gives to me, even though we are separated by all of 3 months. But look, I'll take deference in any way that I can get it from someone as extraordinarily distinguished and personally wonderful as my sister Elaine. So with 3 months separating us, I having turned 84 before she, we want to affirm that we do have something to say. That is elders, elders in our different and yet in some ways very similar communities. Elders are to be respected. And increasingly what I find is that around the world, we elders are respected, as is the tradition, even though increasingly we may not be heard very often. And so from an elder to you, my sisters, my brothers, my siblings, let me say this. I believe that how we, each of us, moves through the world is not totally determined by, but is strongly influenced by what we have already experienced. And so I think in order for you to engage in this conversation with me and my younger sister, Elaine, it will be helpful for me to very quickly share with you something about who I am. I grew up in those wretched days of legal racial discrimination in the southern part of my country. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, very close to the Georgia border. I grew up where signs determined, in a sense, in and everything that I did, because the signs said by the schools or on the school buildings, the parks, the water fountains, the parts of the trains, the buses, that I, as a Black person, had to go to that designated and inevitably inferior space for Black people. I remember very well a sign in my hometown. It said, this was a park. The sign said, no Negroes, Jews, or dogs allowed. There was no museum that I could go to. And if I managed, I don't know, sneak in, do something outrageous to get in, I certainly would not have seen the art that in any way reflected who I am. And so I think it's important for me to share that with you because it helps you to understand why now I am so outrageously passionate about our museums doing the right thing doing the work that they really are to do. And that is to tell all of our stories. The second and last point that I want to make before I turn it over to this young'un, Elaine, is that in 2009, I had quite a honor bestowed on me. I was selected to be the director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art. And in that position, my long history as a social justice activist, as well as my passion, my love of art, put me into a position to see just how marginalized people are not represented in our museums. And that is when I went into cahoots with others, because, you know, anything we take on, it's better to be in cahoots with others than trying to do it on your own. That is when I went into cahoots with others on this task of bringing far greater diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion to our museums. Now, my sisters, my brothers, my siblings, please know that I know that you are in incredibly challenging situations at this moment in time. So am I. So is my younger sister. So is our world. Not one, not two, 3 pandemics. Obviously, COVID-19, for which people of marginalized communities are now, or in response to which people in marginalized communities are suffering disproportionately. 2, economic crises resulting from this health crisis. And again, people of color, again, poor people suffering disproportionately. And then that 3rd pandemic, triggered in many ways by the police violence that led to the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many Black Americans. And so this last pandemic, it ain't a new one. In my country, it's 401 years old, driven by systemic racism and other systems of inequality. But it's all over our world. And so let me bring closure by saying, while my heart goes out to you, because I know what it is like to have our museums closed, to have them under extraordinary financial pressure, to have our beloved colleagues being let go because, in quotes, there's no future for that large of a staff. I've got to say to you, my sisters and my brothers, my siblings, even in these worst of circumstances, we still have to do our best to transform our museums into welcoming sites, even if virtually, for all of the world's people. All right, sis. Young'un, I'm going to let Sharon say anything as our sister if she wants to say it, but I think you're on.
No, I completely fantastic, Johnnetta, and over to you, Elaine.
So hello, everyone. You can see why I'm so deeply honored to be the younger sister of Johnnetta Cole. Johnnetta Cole was, for all my career, one of my heroes. And as we approached 80, we met each other because somebody asked me to panel something that she was on. And we discovered that she was my elder, and I give her as much deference as possible at all times, especially since she served as not only one of my heroes, but one of my most often quoted people. But also because we decided, and this is important to me, and I will read you a piece at the end. We decided that in our older years, where my elder sister often tells me we have so much more to give, we were among the very few people we knew at our age who were still working. And we discovered that friendship in one's older age was just as important as friendship in one's younger age. Now, let me take on some of the substance that Johnnetta placed before you in her own unbelievably impactful style. I am the daughter of German Jewish immigrants, and having been born in 1937, I lived through in the United States the Holocaust. And I also lived through, as Johnnetta pointed out to you, that it was legal to discriminate against Jews as it was legal to discriminate against Black people. The degree of discrimination was entirely different, and I don't put them together in any possible way. But it was legal to make it impossible for us to buy housing in the same way. My parents were obsessed by the Holocaust, and I knew that they were in the business of saving their relatives. And in that process, I understood about illegal immigration. So I want to give you a clue that in America now, the dog whistle about illegal immigration is about people from Latin America who speak Spanish. But all people who are under severe and desperate circumstances are illegal immigrants if there is no other choice, and most of my relatives were illegal as well. I want to talk a little about museums, and that is because I am a professional deputy and a professional consultant to the building of big national museums. And there are a few things that I want to add to this very important presentation that Johnnetta said. And they all have to do with the practicalities of making it real. It is not enough to substitute people of color with people equally trained before them who were white. It is a systemic change of museums that needs to be made. And the systemic change includes absolutely all ways we hire, what job descriptions are, what we privilege as experience over academia, how we use our building, in what way we make the assets of our building available to our community, because the assets of our building include water, electricity, toilets, and heat. And in moments like desperate circumstances, we own some of the most important assets in our community. And without us reinterrogating the world of work and the assumptions we have about the world of work, we will perpetuate what working conditions were. They were created in the Victorian age to privilege men and to make lesser people of everybody who worked below the top. They are intentionally hierarchical. And unless we go back and reinterrogate every single work assumption, we will not complete the task that my eldest sister so incredibly pointed out. It is not only that we are bringing people into our museums, but that we are looking at what equity means in the world of work as we go forward. Now, before we take your questions, let me say something about what friendship is and what we can do in each of our generations. I hope you have reviewed the people who believe in you, especially the odd, quirky aspects of you, and give you the courage to explore and make use of who you are. The optimum and authentic you and the broadening of your personal strengths requires company. It is as crucial to your success as the air you breathe and can energize official credentials that so often fail sufficiently to inspire. So my message to you is play it forward. Make sure you have pals and mentees for your own sake. Not only is that thrilling, it is the only way to pay your mentors and parents back. Every individual in every generation needs someone who cares about them especially. And in my old age, I am grateful for my sister and a few very long-time friends who, like me, continue to produce when so few of our age continue to do so. These working pals find that they too need friends who can wander down this final life chapter together. Mentoring and support at every level and at every age remains essential. And now, my dear Sharon, we can answer the question of our collective family.
But could I just butt in as the
Boss.
elder to say that what you just read, dearest younger sister, in many ways is the charge to each of us. But let me take it, and this is the first time I've really done this, but let me take it, Elaine, to say that the relationship between the two of us that is about as close as white on rice, or if you want to be conscious of diversity, black on coal. But it's a relationship that in many ways comes about because of other relationships.
That's right.
And this call that we're putting out for greater diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in our museums could in some ways be seen as what it means in the workplace for individuals to begin as colleagues.
Exactly.
That's
right.
what defines a relationship. But then to move to being allies, particularly when people in a dominant or a privileged position decide to learn enough and open enough and care enough and be empathetic enough to understand the lives of marginalized people. That's an ally. And if you're lucky, some of those relationships could turn into friendships. Friendships across difference. And now we get to us. when friendship is no longer sufficient to define the relationship and we move to kinship terms. Sorry, Sharon, my sister, but I just felt really moved to say all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And I don't think the panelists are the only ones that are moved. Certainly some beautiful tributes in the chat function, truly emotive words. And when I ask for questions, people saying you're already answering our questions. A real, tribute to the words that you shared with us. So thank you very, very much for that. And maybe we can begin with the first question, which is about words. And it's from Adele Patrick, who is the one of the leaders of Glasgow Women's Library. And she says, I was touched by Johnetta's choice to use kinship in her introduction. Kinship is etymologically linked to kindness. In both presenters' leadership approaches, what part does kindness play? So Elaine, I'm going to come to you.
Well, it's really interesting. I have just done a review of an entire museum in which accusations of racism and of all the other isms have happened. And I have spent a whole week thinking about this very issue of kindness. And I have decided that kindness is within our control. It is not only within our control, it is an absolute priority. And it precedes hearts and minds. That civility is an intention that must be in place to re-heal and to go forward with social justice. So I have spent a week deeply engaged with how you repair both our country, which if we are lucky, we will be forced to repair with people that we deeply disengage with, and the first thing will have to be civility and kindness. We are, after all, humans who take up no more and no less than human space. And kindness has turned out to be the biggest political first step in my entire armamentarium.
Johnnetta, what do you think about the power of kindness in our professional lives?
I'm thinking that something is required almost before we can begin to express kindness in this very cruel world that we're in. And it's not that the world is, it is that we're being cruel to each other. And that is courage. I think it really takes courage to be kind.
I agree.
One of my sheroes, a term, little sis, that I prefer to heroes, one of my sheroes, because for every hero in the world, there's at least one shero. One of my sheroes, the wonderful, world-renowned writer Maya Angelou, once said, courage is the most important of all the attributes, for without it, none of the others can be practiced consistently. It takes courage to be kind to someone who is not kind to you. It takes courage to reach out across lines of difference, whether they're drawn because of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, class, religion. It takes courage to engage in courageous conversations that might begin to help us transform ourselves and our workplaces? It was a wonderful question. I'm so glad.
I agree.
I'm so glad it was raised.
It's a brilliant, brilliant question. So there's lots of questions coming through. I'm going to try and get through as many as possible. There's one on, maybe this is, where we keep our eyes on the prize. There's one around social justice. What are the top priorities for social justice in society today? And I'll add to that, for a museum audience, how do we enact that? Where do our organisations come into play in the battle for social justice?
So first of all, my apologies. I knew better than to say heroes, so it's on me, but moving on here. I'd like to put two more things down rather than issues. One of them is optimism, that we must, that having street cred, understanding how cynical the world is, showing off with your cynicism and criticism does not help anyone. And that therefore, both Johnnetta and I would suggest, are both on the one hand realists, but on the other remain idealists. We believe that love is possible. And without that, we can't go forward, because there really are enough horrible things and people in the world who do extraordinary damage. But if we concentrate on that, if we make our museum rules reflect what we know rather than what we hope, we cannot build social justice.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about some words of one of my heroes. His name is James Baldwin, a writer, a Black American, a gay man, who once said this: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed that is not faced." I'm thinking about that so much these days. Those powerful words of James Baldwin. Because if social justice is our goal, if at least some of us consider ourselves to be social justice activists, I think the most fundamental thing that we have to do is to face and to own what is it that we're struggling against.
I agree.
And I just have to say, and I certainly do not intend to turn this into a partisan discussion, but when I hear leaders deny even the existence of systemic racism, and I would add systemic sexism and other systems of inequality, it's not clear to me how we can move forward. You've got to own it before you can fix it. I'm also, I guess I'm just stuck right now, sis, on heroes and sheroes. But I'm thinking now about another shero. And this woman bore the name Audre Lorde.
I know who she is.
Known well in our country, but really around the world. She spent time in Australia with Aboriginal indigenous people. She spent time in Germany. Audre Lorde was clearly, in my view, the most well-known, and these would be her words of description, Black, feminist, lesbian, professor, poet, mother, warrior. And Audre said, she said so many things that I wish our lives would be influenced by. But she said, your silence will not protect you. And in this period, Sister Sharon, of heightened focus on, hopefully interest in, work around, and yes, my sis, optimism about change of, we cannot remain silent.
Absolutely.
There's just
Here, here.
too much that we have got to read and think about and discuss and work around and work for to remain silent if we want in any way to say we are social justice activists.
Perfect. Elaine, just wait for a second because there's a good question here that I think, a lot of our people like core examples and examples of practice. So looking back at your prolific careers, could you share one experience that helped keep your hopes high for a better world in a museum context? And that's from Clemence Acard. Elaine, do you want to do that? What is your one experience that you would share as something that was transformative?
Well, it's going to be a surprising one. It's even surprising to me. The word I wanted to use and the memory that it happens has to do with both the word welcome and the word tradition, or the word, no, welcome I'll leave alone. So I was the senior consultant to Papa. Papa was the museum that looked at the very practice of biculturalism. And that meant that one needed to understand the words of welcome in both Maori and in English, and to use them interchangeably. And I went with the Te Papa delegation to Hawaii to a conference, and I sat in the audience, and Indigenous Hawaiians danced. And when it was over, I was sitting next to my Maori head of Te Papa, and he stood and he made a traditional song of welcome to people he had never met before and in a country not his own. And I understood that you could bring your practice of welcome and present it, and it would be understood not only by the Indigenous receivers, but everyone in the hall. And I was overcome and began to cry that there are formal ways of welcome that we learn in our own traditions, and that the practice of them is a gift to other people. And that they tell you that the specificity of your welcome is generalizable. And that all of us have to look at making each and every person in particular feel welcome. And you can do that from your own background forward.
That's a very beautiful and poignant example. And I know that many people will have seen one of the reopening videos from a museum in New Zealand where they managed to contain COVID-19 and hopefully long may they continue to contain it. And they did exactly that Maori traditional welcome ceremony to welcome people back into the space, which was very emotional and beautiful thing to see. Johnnetta, can you share with us your example?
I'm going to give an example, but I need to preface what I say by saying that while what I will describe was moving, transformational, really important in my own life and museum practice, there is an element to this story that reminds us that this work that we're doing really involves a very long journey. I had just come to the Smithsonian in 2009. Excuse me. And in 2010, at the Portrait Gallery, an exhibition opened called Hide, Seek, Difference and Desire. I was beyond excited about that exhibition. Not only because it was the first in the world, I think I would have evidence for this, that had really focused on the art and the culture and the lives of people in the LGBTQ communities. And I just thought, this is what we are to do. This is what our museums are to do. And because Audre Lorde, who I referenced a moment ago, had worked so hard on me as a heterosexual woman to own and deal with my own homophobia and heterosexism. That exhibition had unusual meaning for me. As many of you may know, because we do know what's going on across the pond or across the ocean, the Smithsonian made a terrible mistake in response to criticism about a particular part of that exhibition. It, in my view, did what only can be called an act of censorship. And so I am sharing this in response to yet again a very beautiful, timely, important question to say that, change, transformation is not like some instant act. It is a very long, complicated, painful, often 2 steps back in order to take one forward journey.
Absolutely.
And I suppose the point is to embark on that journey in the first place. So another question, and this is a good question because it plays to the individual response to the many hundreds of delegates who are in the virtual room with us. What would you say to your 20-year-old self? So Elaine, what would you say to your 20-year-old self?
You are not as odd as you think you are. You're not as ungainly as you think you are. And the remaking of self, the perseverance, the stubbornness, and your passion is all you need. If you remember what my elder sister said, that it is a long journey ahead, and each of those steps is wonderful. You don't start at the top. You don't need to start at the top. Each step along the way will have some joy, and some advance in social justice.
And that very much speaks to an earlier conversation that we had about the superpower of feminist leadership, when we were saying actually you don't have to be in a leadership position to enact change. We can all begin on that journey of creating and making change. Johnnetta, what would you say to your 20-year-old self? Johnnetta, you're still muted.
My apologies. 20 years old, having discovered anthropology, having found a set of lenses through which I would view the world, figuring that I knew a lot. I wish someone had said to me, "You don't know hardly anything." It's not that I was arrogant or puffy, but at 20, I wish I had a better sense of how much more there was for me to learn, to experience, to overcome.
Mm.
But, you know, and I say this to whoever posed the question, I kind of think it's all right to be 20 and not know what you don't know.
I agree.
After all, if you are as fortunate as my younger sister and I, at 20, you had 60 plus more years to figure out some stuff.
Agreed. Totally agreed. Here, here.
So there's some younger people in the audience, and we've probably had that question asked of us before. What would you say to your younger self? But there's an interesting one that rides on the back of that, and that's from Laura van Broekhoven, who is the director of the Pitt Rivers Museum, a change maker herself. And she said, can we also ask, what would you say to your 50-year-old self? Would that be different? Elaine, what would you say to your 50-year-old self?
Well, somebody gave me a birthday present when I was 50 in the form of this sentence. So this is the gift to every 50-year-old. They said, congratulations, your anxiety cells have all died. Now that turned out not to be true, but it was true enough. By 50, I knew enough about myself not to apologize for myself. That you got what you got, and I knew how to use it, and I knew where it was useful, and I was unapologetic of where it wasn't, because what I knew by 50 was I'm really good at what I'm good at, and I'm really terrible at most everything else. It's a tiny swath of what I'm good at. And I need my grandchildren to pick up after me and to point out the red lights when I need to cross the street. I'm a total mess, but I stopped apologizing for it. It just was. So I would tell you, your anxiety cells die when you're 50, but what they die about is you know who you are, and that's good enough.
Mm, mm.
And a little bit of self-knowledge goes a very long way. Johnnetta, what would you say to your 50-year-old self?
When I was 50, something extraordinary happened. I became the president of one of my country's only 2 historically Black colleges for women. It's called Spelman College, and it's located in Atlanta, Georgia. And I would tell my 50-year-old self, if I could have, your deep feelings of feminism, your commitment to the role of women helping to fundamentally change the world for the better is going to be a longer road than you think. And in full disclosure, I didn't find at Spelman College the amount of passion about feminism that I had. And I also had experiences that told me that even on a Black women's campus, some of that stuff, those isms would be there.
Mm.
And so I remember those years with extraordinary joy because there were no challenges that were ever bigger than the sheer joy of watching young women own their total selves.
Mm.
I, of course, as a college president, had to do a lot of fundraising. So I would often fear that when I returned to campus one day, out there in the world begging for money for my college, I would find a good percentage of the student body on the top, on the roof of a main building. And they would all be going like this because we had told them, and many of them believed that they could fly. And so I'm telling this story as a way of saying that at each of the stages of our lives, I think, there are lessons to be learned
Absolutely.
and joys to be experienced.
Perfect words. Another question here from Rowan Brown. Thank you. She says, thank you for your wise words, both. Where do you find the hope that sustains you? Elaine, where do you find your hope?
The alternative is worse. First of all, I know a couple of things about neurology that's useful. You're braver in the morning than at night. So I do the hardest things in the morning and the easiest things at night. And I look at despair. It's really just below the surface for all of us. We all have despair. And I think it's not worth it. And it is by force of will that I have hope, because hope and kindness are decisions of the soul. And so I understand despair. I understand it's with everyone. And I suggest you turn it off like a movie theater, like a movie camera, and you carry on to things that give you pleasure. And the more despairing you are at the end of the day, find something that gives you joy.
Thank you, Elaine. And Johnnetta, what sustains you? What gives you hope?
Well, first, I want to say to everything that my younger sister just said, I'm going to say amen and a women too. Now, I agree, Elaine. Hopelessness is dread.
Mm,
It may be our greatest enemy because without hope, how do we proceed?
exactly.
How do we even imagine that things could be better? How do we have the gall, the bodaciousness, the chutzpah to do what is required to help to make things better? And so hope is just, I think, so fundamental in the life of anyone who self-defines as a social activist.
I agree.
But I do think that there are practices that can help.
Mm,
And Sister Elaine just gave us one, ordering your day in terms of what you do in the morning and at night. I find that I am spending more time than in the past with my mindfulness and meditation practice. And what I mean to say from that is you've got to be still to find hope.
I agree.
And then when you find it, that's when you better get charged up and ready to go.
Amazing, amazing words of wisdom from you two, my sheroes. And I know everybody in the audience from the chat is feeling the same. That was absolutely inspirational, powerful stuff. It was food for our souls and our imaginations and for the future of museums. I couldn't have wanted to hear wiser words at this point in a challenging year and at this point when we need to rethink what our museums are and what they can do for us in society. It's been absolutely amazing. This session has been recorded. We'll share it on our website. And I know many people are already saying in the chat they want to come back to your words again and again. I hope we can have the opportunity to share many, many times in the future, because we need Elaine and we need Johnnetta, your wisdom to help us through these difficult times. Thank you so much.
A virtual hug to you, Sister Sharon. And where is my elder?
Mwah. Thank you all. And thank you, my sister, who gives me hope every time I get to see or talk to her. Thank you,
Now,
everybody, for coming.
did you notice what I did? I changed up the language on you. I said, where is my elder?
I did. I heard it, but I thought you must be referring to someone else.
No, it's because your wisdom, your soulfulness, you may be younger, but it makes you in many ways my elder as well. I love you very much, Elaine.
Well, back at you. You are my shero, double she.